Today we'll be talking about the timeline of Connecticut history. So we will be looking at page 19. If you have the pages I told you to print out, I would take page 20. And what I did is, I don't like a couple of facts at the bottom, so I would just cut those out right here, cut it after 2001, and then cut this out and just glue it to the timeline. That way you don't have to write all those different things down. But we're just going to go through some today. So those of you who are not doing it, even if you are doing it, just listen to some of these dates of Connecticut history. All right. So in our timeline, 1614, Adrian Block, representing the Dutch, sailed up the Connecticut River. In 1633, the Dutch made a fort, the House of Good Hope, on the future site of Hartford. So, do you remember when we talked about all the different the 13 original colonies being founded? The Dutch came to Connecticut. John Oldham and others explore and trade along the Connecticut River in 1633. Plymouth Colony sent William Holmes to found a trading post at Windsor, Connecticut. Do you guys know where that is? Windsor. In 1634, Wethersfield was founded by the people from Massachusetts. And in 1634 also, first English arrived in Windsor. There was a fort erected at Saybrook in 1635. And in 1636, Thomas Hooker and his company journeyed from Newtown or Cambridge, Massachusetts to found Hartford. In 1637, there's the Pequot War, and Captain John Mason leads the colonists to a decisive victory. Do you remember we talked about John Mason settling New Hampshire, I believe it was. 1639, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, adopted by the Freemen of Hartford, Wethersfield, and Windsor. And I just highlighted a few dates. I'm not going to be reading everything on here. I just highlighted a few that I thought you'd think are interesting. In 1662, John Winthrop obtained a charter for Connecticut. John Winthrop Jr. Do you remember John Winthrop, Singleton? 1665, the Union of New Haven and Connecticut colonies was completed. In 1675 through 1676, Connecticut participates in King Philip's War, which was fought in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. 1687, this is when Edmund Andros, when we talked about he tried to get the charter, he assumed rule over Connecticut, and the Charter Oak episode occurs that we talked about. 1689, Connecticut resumes government under our normal charter. We're going to jump to 1717. Collegiate school moves to New Haven, and it was called Yale the next year. 1740s, this is the height of the Great Awakening. 1755, we got our first newspaper, the Connecticut Gazette in New Haven. 1765, we were opposed to the Stamp Act. 1774, now you know when 1774 is. It's right before the War for Independence. 1774, Silas Deane, Eliphalet Dyer, Roger Sherman represent Connecticut at the First Continental Congress. In 1775, several thousand militia rushed to Massachusetts in the Lexington Alarm. Do you remember Lexington and Concord? The shot heard around the world. 1775, Connecticut men helped plan and carry out the seizure of Fort Ticonderoga. You remember I said we were called the land of provisions because we helped supply a lot of cannons and food. In 1777 and 1779, the British troops are raiding New Haven, Fairfield, Norwalk, and Danbury. And 1781, Benedict Arnold's attack upon New London and Groton involves a massacre at Fort Griswold. And I don't know if you've heard of Benedict Arnold, but he was a traitor of our country. 1784, the earliest Connecticut cities are incorporated: Hartford, Middletown, New Haven, New London, and Norwich. Have you heard of some of those? 1793 to 1796, the old State House was erected by designed by Charles Bulfinch. Do you remember going there for a field trip? 1799, Eli Whitney, remember the guy who invented the cotton gin? He procures his first federal musket contract. Within next decade, develops a system of interchangeable parts applicable to industries. 1806, the first important English dictionary in the United States, published by, can you guess who? Noah Webster. Yes. 1815 was the first steamboat voyage up to the Connecticut River. 1817, Thomas Gallaudet founded the School for the Deaf in Hartford. 1828, the Farmington Canal was opened. In 1831, the Wesleyan University was founded in Middletown. 1835, some of you boys will find this interesting, the revolver was patented by Colt. 1842, the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, the first public art museum, was established. Have you heard of Charles Goodyear? Maybe you've heard of Goodyear tires. This is rubber. Charles Goodyear developed vulcanizing process for rubber. Let's see. Slavery was abolished in 1848. 1875, Hartford was made the capital, the only capital. At 1877, a first telephone exchange in the world opened in New Haven. 1907, the first Boy Scout troop was opened. 1917, do you remember what is happening in 1917? World War I. 1917 through 1918, 67,000 Connecticut men approximately served in World War I. 1941 through 1945 is World War II, and approximately 210,000 Connecticut men served in World War II. In 1944, I'm sure you've heard of this, the Ringling Brothers Circus. The Ringling Brothers Circus tent fire in Hartford killed 168 people. In 1947, Fair Employment Practices Act adopted the outlawing job discrimination. That means based on your race, or if you're a girl or boy, or different things, that they can't discriminate against that. In 1950 through 1952, about 52,000 Connecticut men served in the Korean War. In 1958, the Connecticut Turnpike opened. In 1962 through 75, about 104,000 Connecticut men and women served in the armed forces during the Vietnam War era. In 1974, girls go like this: Ella Grasso, the first woman elected governor in Connecticut. In 1990, Eunice Rourke, the first woman elected lieutenant governor in Connecticut. You could see in here, in 2001, the 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York City killed 152 residents from Connecticut. There's quite a few events that are listed in this timeline, and I know we just went through those really quickly, but those are just a few events that happened in Connecticut. So Connecticut does have quite a lot of history. There's on the next page, page 21, there's a lot of Connecticut historical firsts. We have the first Constitution adopted in 1639. We had our first newspaper in 1764, the first submarine in 1775, first state house in America in 1788, the first cotton gin in 1794 by Eli Whitney. We have quite a few things. The first revolver in 1836, the first portable typewriter in 1843, first use of anesthesia, to knock people out before surgery, that's in 1844. The first practical sewing machine in 1846 by Elias Howe. the first tape measure in 1868, and the first payphone in 1877, the first collapsible toothpaste tube in 1892, the first hamburger in 1895 at Louis' Lunch. I want to go get one. The first lollipop in 1908. How interesting are all these things? The first frisbee in 1920 because Yale College students were taking empty pie plates and they were throwing them across the lawn. The first vacuum cleaner in 1933, so you can blame Connecticut on the vacuums. The first Polaroid camera in 1934. The first helicopter in 1939 by Igor Sikorsky. The first color TV in 1948. The first nuclear submarine in 1954. The first artificial heart in 1982. There's quite a few firsts for Connecticut, and I hope you got a good overview of some Connecticut history and some of the Connecticut timeline today.